Disney park staff, why did you break character? I'll never forget the time my mum, a long-time costume character at Disneyland, had to break character to defend herself. She was always so committed to staying in character no matter what, but one incident forced her hand. It was a normal day at the park and my mum was happily wandering around in her piglet costume entertaining guests as she always did. But then, out of nowhere, two teenage boys approached her and started attacking her. At first, my mum tried to just block their blows and protect herself, not wanting to ruin the magic for the guests. But the assault continued, and eventually my mum, who stands just 4 or 10 inches tall and was wearing a costume that weighed around 50 pounds, managed to knock one of the boys to the ground and pin him. The other kid kept attacking her, and I think my mum might have cried out or yelped at one point because the boy she had pinned suddenly realised, "Oh shit, it's a chick." Yeah, no kidding, buddy. Most of the shorter character performers at Disneyland are women. They fit the parts better. Luckily, some of the other cast members saw what was happening and rushed over to help my mum. The two troublemakers were quickly banned from the park, but my mum still got in trouble too for breaking character during the incident. I think she was even suspended for a couple of days. Before delving into the next regrettable recap, please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like us to create more of this content. Thank you. Story 2. Shortly after graduating college and landing our first real jobs, a group of my friends and I decided to celebrate with a trip to Disneyland. We ended up having breakfast at the Disneyland Hotel, where characters often come around and interact with guests during the meal. As we were sitting there griping and complaining about our new jobs and bosses, Cinderella herself approached our table. With a big, bright smile on her face, she cheerfully asked us, "How are you all doing this lovely morning?" One of my friends didn't hesitate to tell Cinderella that we were actually in the middle of venting about our frustrations with work. Now, I don't know if Cinderella was just that good at staying in character, or if she was genuinely sympathising with us, but what happened next was priceless. She quickly glanced around to make sure no one else was listening, and then, without even moving her lips, she leaned in and quietly said, "You should try working for the mouse." The whole time, she kept that signature Disney princess smile plastered on her face, as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. Let me tell you, that was hands down the best Disney moment I've ever experienced. To see Cinderella, of all characters, acknowledging the struggles of the working world and subtly commiserating with us, it was just so unexpected and hilarious. Story 3. In 1996, my family had the chance to visit Disneyland, and we had a memorable encounter with the character Pocahontas that stuck with me ever since. My little sister, who was only 4 years old at the time, was getting her picture taken with Pocahontas when some teenager started behaving inappropriately towards the character. My parents didn't hesitate to step in and give the kid a piece of their mind. Even though the cast members couldn't yell at the rude guest themselves, my mum made it clear that she and my dad sure as heck could. "I know you can't yell at him, but we sure as hell can," she told Pocahontas. The whole time, Pocahontas maintained her warm, friendly smile and continued taking pictures with the kids. But you could tell by the look in her eyes that she was grateful my parents had stood up for her. Story 4. Growing up, my family would take regular trips to Disney World, and one particular visit stands out in my mind even all these years later. It was around Valentine's Day, and my mum, dad, older sister and I were exploring one of the parks together. At the time, my dad was a physically and verbally abusive person, and he had a habit of just being miserable and ruining the fun on our family vacations. On this particular day, my sister and I were excitedly searching for our favourite characters, all of whom were wearing big red hearts around their necks. My sister had just spotted Eeyore, her absolute favourite, when she turned around with her ice cream cone. Unfortunately, my dad wasn't paying attention and ended up running right into her, getting ice cream all over his shirt. In a completely disproportionate reaction, he hauled off and smacked my sister across the face, knocking her glasses off and causing her to drop her cone. She started crying, and my mum immediately started yelling at my dad for his terrible behaviour. Of course, he tried to defend his actions, saying my sister should have watched where she was going. But then, something incredible happened. Eeyore, the character my sister had been so excited to see, came over and wrapped her up in a big hug. It snapped her right out of her tears, and suddenly she was just beaming with joy because Eeyore was hugging her. Eeyore kept hugging her, then stopped to point to the heart around his neck, and then to my sister. He gave her another big squeeze before finally letting go. My mum was able to snap a picture of my sister and I standing with Eeyore, and you can just see the pure happiness on my sister's face, even though her eyes are still a little red from crying. Story 5. I'll never forget the time I chaperoned a group of individuals with special needs on a trip to Disneyland. As part of our tour, we got the chance to meet some of the iconic Disney characters, and let me tell you, they really went above and beyond for our group. Minnie Mouse was flirting up a storm with one of my friends, while Merida from Brave even directed some of her playful banter my way. But the character who really stood out was Cruella de Vil. Now, Cruella is known for being pretty mean and insulting to the people she interacts with, but with our group of special needs guests, she managed to stay fully in character without ever actually saying anything truly cruel or hurtful. Take, for example, when she encountered one of the guys in our group who was using a cane. Instead of mocking him, Cruella simply remarked, "Ah, I like your cane. You can use it to beat little ones out of your way." It was delivered with her signature Cruella flair, but there was no real malice behind it. The rest of our interactions with Cruella followed a similar pattern. She kept up her villainous persona, but tailored her comments to be more playful than genuinely mean-spirited. It was clear she recognised our group was a bit different and adapted her approach accordingly. Story 6. About 10 years ago, one of my friends was working as a face character at Disneyland. She told me this incredible story about another performer who was friends with Goofy, which is the kind of thing you say when you're out of costume to help keep the Disney magic alive. Anyway, this Goofy performer was finishing up his shift one day and trying to make his way backstage to cool off. But on his way out, an angry mum started yelling at him, claiming he had ignored her son. In reality, Goofy just couldn't see the kid as he was turning to leave. Well, this mum wasn't having it. She started accusing Goofy of being racist and ignoring her son because they were black. Can you believe the nerve of that woman? But instead of losing his cool, Goofy kept his composure and turned back around to greet the child. He signed the kid's autograph book and then, in a brilliant move, he quickly slipped up his sleeve to show the mum his own black skin before walking away. I can just imagine the look on that woman's face when she realised she had falsely accused Goofy of being racist, when he was clearly a performer of colour himself. What an epic mic drop moment. Story 7. Apparently, Disneyland used to have a Tarzan character who would roam around the parks posing for photos and interacting with guests. But the thing is, Tarzan's costume was pretty revealing, just a simple loincloth with nothing else covering him up. And well, as you can probably imagine, that led to some rather inappropriate behaviour from some of the female guests. They would constantly try to grab the actor's butt when they got close for photos. I can only imagine how uncomfortable and intrusive that must have been for the performers. So the park made the decision to just retire the Tarzan character altogether for a while. I guess they figured it was easier to just eliminate the problem altogether than to keep dealing with that kind of grabby, disrespectful behaviour from guests. But the story doesn't end there. Apparently, Tarzan has since made a comeback at Disneyland, with the costume designers getting a bit more creative. Now, instead of just the skimpy loincloth, the Tarzan character wears a kind of jungle vine sash and shorts combo. I guess the idea is to make it a little less easy for guests to grope the performer, but based on what I've heard, the grabby behaviour from some visitors is still an ongoing issue, even with the updated costume. Story 8. When I was just 6 years old, my family took a trip to Disney World, and I had the chance to meet one of my favourite characters, Captain Hook. Now, as you probably know, the Disney characters aren't really supposed to break character or do anything outside of their normal routines. But thanks to the kindness of one particular pirate captain, I have a special memory that's stuck with me all these years. I was so excited to meet Captain Hook, and I really wanted him to sign my autograph book. But when I asked, he had to politely refuse, since that wouldn't have been in keeping with his villainous character. Well, that just broke my little 6-year-old heart. I started crying, devastated that I wouldn't get Captain Hook's signature. Luckily, my mum stepped in and went to talk to him. I'm not sure exactly what she said, but I imagine she must have explained very nicely how upset I was about it. And you know what? Captain Hook ended up signing my book after all, even though he technically wasn't supposed to. I was overjoyed, of course, and I've always remembered that little act of kindness from the infamous pirate captain. He could have easily stuck to the rules and just left me in tears. But instead, he took the time to make a little kid's dream come true, even if it meant bending the character guidelines just a bit. Story 9. I'll never forget the time I met one of the most incredible Disney employees ever on a cruise ship. This guy looked exactly like Peter Pan. I mean, spitting image. So of course, my family and I just had to ask him about it. But do you know what he said? Nope, Peter Pan has brown eyes. We were a bit confused at first, but then the next day, when we went to get a picture with the real Peter Pan, this same employee came up to us, got super close and whispered, "See, Peter has brown eyes." Story 10. When my wife was in college, she had the incredible opportunity to portray one of the most iconic Disney characters, Goofy. It was a semester-long role, and she took it very seriously, dedicated to bringing that lovable, goofy personality to life for all the guests she interacted with. But one day, there was a pretty frightening incident that really shook her up. My wife was giving a big, enthusiastic, goofy hug to a young Make-A-Wish kid in a wheelchair when she accidentally knocked out the child's feeding tube. Yikes, talk about a nightmare scenario. Thankfully, all the costume characters at Disney have specially trained handlers who are there to assist and support them. So the situation was quickly resolved and the child was not seriously harmed. But my wife still felt absolutely terrible about the whole thing, even though it was clearly an accident. Caused by the limited visibility and mobility of the Goofy costume, she was pretty traumatized for weeks afterwards. It's got to be so difficult to maintain that Goofy persona and keep the magic alive when something like that happens. But my wife is nothing if not resilient. She dusted herself off, did her best to recover from the incident, and continued bringing joy to all the guests she interacted with for the rest of her time as Goofy. I have so much respect for the way she handled it. Story 11. One time when I was visiting Animal Kingdom at Disney World, I had the most delightful encounter with a woman who looked just like the character Anna from Frozen. It was remarkable how spot on the resemblance was, right down to the distinctive red hair with the blonde streak. We were waiting in line for the dinosaur ride when we noticed her and couldn't help but comment on the similarity. That's when she suddenly lowered her voice and leaned in, speaking to us in a conspiratorial tone. "Shh, you need to keep it down," she whispered. "I'm undercover at the moment." She then went on to spin this amazing tale about being a secret agent or something along those lines. I wish I could remember the exact details, but the gist of it was that she was a Frozen character who had gone rogue and was now on a special mission. It was such a clever and playful interaction, perfectly in line with Anna's spirited, adventurous personality. There was little doubt in my mind that this woman was an actual Disney performer, fully committed to staying in character even when guests stumbled upon her off-duty. Story 12. About 2 months after our infant son had passed away, my husband and I decided to take a trip to one of the Disney parks. Our little boy's entire nursery was themed around Neverland and Peter Pan, since that was one of the things we had been most excited to share with him. Needless to say, it was an incredibly emotional and bittersweet experience for us. We had always wanted to bring our son to Disney so he could meet Peter Pan, his favourite character. But now, that dream would never come true. As we were walking through the park, we came across a face performer portraying Peter Pan. My husband and I were alone with the character and his handler, and I tearfully explained our situation to them. I even showed them the memorial tattoo I'd gotten, an exact replica of my son's hospital handprint. Without hesitation, the Peter Pan performer agreed to pose for photos with my tattoo. He took several pictures, making sure to capture the moment in a way that would be meaningful for us. And then, to our surprise, he broke character and embraced me in a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "God bless you and your family. I'm so sorry for your loss." Story 13. As an ex-cast member at one of the Disney parks, I had the chance to work the parade route on more than one occasion. My job was to help make sure kids didn't dart out in front of the floats and characters, keeping everything running smoothly and safely. Now, the friends of characters, the performers who interact with the crowd but aren't the main characters themselves, would often have a bit of playful fun with us cast members along the parade route. They'd wink, make silly faces, that sort of thing. It was all part of the magic. But one particular day, I had a run-in with Baloo the bear that was anything but playful. Baloo came strutting up to me mid-dance, bowing down in a grand gesture. And you know what? That bear was wearing some kind of tall crown or hat with a star on top. Well, as Baloo stood back upright, that star managed to smack me right in the mouth, cutting my lip open and giving me a nasty fat lip. I'm pretty sure I even heard Baloo gasp audibly when they realised what had happened. The bear immediately stopped dancing and just stared at me, blood dripping down my face. Baloo tried to reach out and grab my hands, probably to try and help, but the handler quickly swooped in and ushered the character along, not wanting the incident to disrupt the parade. Oops, indeed. I can only imagine how horrified Baloo must have felt, accidentally injuring a cast member like that. It just goes to show how even the most experienced performers can sometimes have those little mishaps, no matter how hard they try to avoid them. As for me, I just had to tough it out and keep working the parade route. The show had to go on after all. Story 14. I'll never forget the time I witnessed Jack Sparrow dealing with a real messy situation at the Disney parks. This little kid was talking to the famous pirate captain when suddenly they started projectile vomiting everywhere. It was a total disaster. But you know what? Jack Sparrow handled it like a total pro. Instead of reacting with disgust or breaking character, he just looked down at the kid and said, "Too much of the old apple juice, eh? Been there myself, even ran out once." Can you believe the guy's quick thinking and ability to stay in character, even with puke flying everywhere? It was so impressive to see him just roll with the punches like that. I'm sure most people would have panicked or completely lost their cool. But not Jack Sparrow. He just kept that signature swagger and charm, cracking a joke and making light of the situation. I imagine it's not the first time he's had to deal with something like that on the job. Those Disney performers really have seen it all. Story 15. When I was working as a lifeguard at one of the Disney water parks, I had an interesting encounter with a young guest who just couldn't seem to follow the rules. It wasn't a full-on break character moment, but it definitely tested the limits of my Disney-approved customer service persona. This kid kept going down the water slide head first, even though I had repeatedly told him that he had to go feet first for safety reasons. Every single time, he would say okay and then immediately do it again the wrong way. It was starting to become a real problem, with the other kids seeing him break the rules and trying to copy him. After warning him several more times, I finally had to ban the kid from going down the slide altogether. Well, that really set him off. He left in tears to go complain to his parents. And of course, his parents came back to yell at me, saying I wasn't being very magical in my interactions. I tried to explain the situation, that I had given the kid multiple chances and was just trying to enforce the rules for everyone's safety. But my coordinator ended up giving me a stern talking to about being the nice lifeguard who explains versus the mean lifeguard who just yells orders. Honestly, I didn't feel too bad about the whole thing. I was just trying to do my job and keep the water park safe for all the guests. And you know what happened later that day? That same kid was running on the deck, despite my requests for him to slow down. And he ended up tripping and eating concrete. Oops, story 16. When I did the college program at Walt Disney World, I had the chance to work in a variety of roles, including audience control for the parades. Let me tell you, those costume character performers are true professionals. I never once saw them break character, even in the most challenging situations. That said, I did witness a few incidents that really showed just how demanding the job can be. More than once, I saw fully costumed characters practically get sick to their stomachs right inside their heads. I can't even imagine how uncomfortable and miserable that must have felt. But the most impressive display of commitment I saw was with Prince Naveen. During one parade, the poor guy started suffering from heat exhaustion, but he managed to stay completely in character and leave the route without disrupting the magic for the guests. It wasn't until the parade was over that we saw him in the back, practically passed out. The show really must go on, even when the performers are dealing with physical distress. The parade just doubled its speed to make up for Naveen's struggle. Story 17. As a performer for Party Princess Productions, I've had some pretty wild experiences bringing characters to life for kids' birthday parties. But one incident in particular has really stuck with me over the years. I was playing the role of Darth Vader for a party in Malibu, and it was just me and the birthday boy, which was pretty rare. We were having a blast, playing lightsaber duel games, and practicing the ways of the dark side together. The kid was totally into it, and I could tell he was really having fun. But then, right in the middle of our saber battle, the kid started coughing. At first it was subtle, but it quickly got worse and worse until he was practically not breathing at all. I was about to take off my Darth Vader helmet and start performing CPR when the boy's mother came rushing out with his asthma inhaler. Turns out, she had known all along that her son had a serious asthmatic condition that flared up with physical activity. But she had never bothered to tell me about it. She just stood by and watched as I played with him, even though she knew it could trigger a dangerous attack. I was absolutely livid. Here I was trying my best to give this kid an amazing, immersive birthday experience, and the whole time his health was at risk because his own mother kept that critical information from me. It was incredibly irresponsible and unsafe. Luckily, the kid was able to use his inhaler and recover, but I was shaken up for the rest of the party. I tried to play it off and keep Darth Vader in character, but inside I was fuming. How could she have let me put her son in harm's way like that? After the party, I immediately called my boss and made it clear that from then on, I need to be informed about any and all medical conditions before I show up to an event. I can't risk another situation like that, where I could have accidentally injured a child just by doing my job. Story 18. I'll never forget the time I was at Disneyland and witnessed a hilarious encounter between the Sheriff of Nottingham and an unsuspecting young guest. The sheriff was doing his best to put on a menacing act, fake threatening this poor kid, when suddenly something unexpected happened. As the sheriff reached out to playfully poke the child's balloon, it just popped. The look of pure shock on the character actor's face was priceless. You could tell he was completely stunned, not expecting the balloon to burst like that in the middle of his performance. But the Disney magic didn't skip a beat. In less than 30 seconds, a brand new balloon appeared, and the sheriff was able to seamlessly continue his interaction with the child, never breaking character. It was such a smooth recovery. You'd never have known something had gone awry. Story 19. As a Disney cast member, I had my fair share of interesting behind-the-scenes experiences that most guests never got to see. One in particular always makes me chuckle when I think back on it. I was walking from the backstage area into the park, pushing one of those handy little dollies we use to transport supplies. Now, these carts have these long support beams sticking out from the end, and as I was making my way through the winding transition path, I managed to smack good old Winnie the Pooh right in the leg with one of them. The sound that came out of Pooh Bear's mouth next was certainly not what you'd expect from that lovable, honey-obsessed character. A big old fuck echoed through the halls, and let me tell you, it caught me completely off guard. I couldn't believe my ears. Winnie the Pooh dropping an F-bomb? Talk about shattering the Disney magic. Knowing full well I couldn't let any guests hear that kind of language coming from one of the iconic characters. The performer inside that Pooh costume must have been absolutely mortified. I can only imagine how much that must have hurt, getting whacked in the leg like that. No wonder the expletive slipped out. It was a totally understandable reaction, even if it went against Pooh's sweet, innocent persona. Story 20. When I was 9 years old, my family took a trip to Disneyland Paris, and I had the most delightful and slightly dramatic encounter with the characters during one of our meals. I had just bought myself a brand new Baby Simba plush, and I decided to bring him along with me to dinner at one of the character dining restaurants. You know, the kind where the Disney characters come right to your table to interact with the guests. Well, most of the characters I met that night were absolutely smitten with my little Simba doll. They pretended to coo over him and even tickle him a bit, which was just the cutest thing. But then, out of nowhere, the Sheriff of Nottingham showed up and decided to stir up some trouble. To my horror, the sheriff snatched my Simba right out of my hands. He held the poor stuffed animal hostage, threatening to run off with him. But luckily, Mr. Incredible happened to be nearby, and he came swooping in to save the day. What followed was the most epic, dramatic, yet completely fake tug-of-war match I had ever seen. Mr. Incredible and the sheriff wrestled and grappled, both refusing to give up their claim on Simba. It was like something straight out of a movie. But of course, in the end, Mr. Incredible emerged victorious, dramatically ripping Simba from the sheriff's grasp and returning the beloved plush to me, safe and sound. I was overjoyed, and the other guests surrounding our table erupted in thunderous applause. Story 21. When I was a kid, my cousin used to work as a costume character at Disneyland, and let me tell you, it was the coolest thing ever. Anytime we knew she was working, my family would make it a point to go find her and try to catch a glimpse of her in action. Now, my cousin mostly played the role of Pooh Bear, and she was so good at it. She never once broke character and said my name out loud, even though we both knew it was her under that big fuzzy costume. Instead, she'd get all animated and bouncy, giving me the biggest, warmest hugs. And occasionally she'd even drop little Pooh-isms, like talking about having a rumbly in her tummy. It just made the whole experience that much more magical and authentic. I felt like I had this secret, special connection with Pooh Bear that none of the other kids could ever have. Let me tell you, being the cousin of an actual Disney character performer made me the envy of all my friends. They were always so impressed that I got to interact with the beloved Winnie the Pooh in such an intimate way. I practically had celebrity status. Story 22. I'll never forget the time I was at Disneyland in California with my ex and her daughter, and the little girl lost her prized first visitor button. As soon as she mentioned it, this Disney employee in the toy shop nearby overheard and immediately sprang into action. "Well, here's a brand new one for you," the cast member cheerfully exclaimed, pulling a fresh button out of a drawer behind the register. It was like they had an entire stash of them just waiting, ready to replace any that got lost or misplaced. I was honestly amazed. I had fully expected us to have to go all the way to the front gate to get a replacement, but these Disney employees clearly have systems in place to handle those kinds of situations quickly and seamlessly. After that experience, I started looking into just how meticulously planned out every aspect of the Disney parks really is. From the moment the gates open to the moment they close, it's like everything has been strategized to perfection, all with the goal of ensuring every guest has a truly magical special day. Honestly, it's kind of mind-blowing. There's an employee or a protocol in place for pretty much any scenario you can imagine. Lost items, misbehaving kids, even ride malfunctions. Disney leaves nothing to chance when it comes to providing that flawless, enchanting experience. Well, almost nothing. Apparently, the one thing that still manages to break down with some regularity is the Splash Mountain Flume ride. But hey, you can't control everything, right? Story 23. Back in the late 80s, when the Disney Store was still a relatively new concept, I had the chance to work at one of the very first locations out in Orange County, California. And let me tell you, we had some pretty memorable characters come through those doors. One of the most unforgettable regulars was this absolutely massive, muscular guy who also happened to be the blackest and most flamboyantly gay dude you ever did see. He'd come in towards the end of the day, right around closing time, and without fail, he'd politely request that we play anything and everything related to Winnie the Pooh. Then, the real show would begin. This guy would just prance around the store, singing along to the Tigger parts of the Pooh dialogue and songs. It was like watching a one-man Disney parade, and let me tell you, it was the most delightful and entertaining thing I'd ever seen. It turns out this larger-than-life character was actually one of the Tigger performers over at Disneyland, and let's just say, he really embodied that bouncy, boundless energy even when he was off the clock. You could tell he just adored being Tigger and bringing that character to life. Watching him strut and sing his way through the Disney Store was an absolute treat. He had such an infectious energy and joy about him. It was impossible not to get swept up in the magic, even if you weren't a hardcore Pooh fan. The guy was just a walking, talking embodiment of pure Disney charm. Story 24. My close friend who used to portray Woody at Disneyland has shared some amazing stories that really showcase the cast members' ability to maintain character no matter what chaos unfolds around them. One time, my friend said, a float actually caught on fire during a parade performance, but instead of panicking or breaking character, the Woody performer and the rest of the cast simply danced around the flames, playing it off so seamlessly that the guests had no idea anything was wrong. They quickly and discreetly got the float backstage to deal with the issue, never letting the magic get interrupted. My friend explained that Disney cast members are incredibly well trained to stay in character at all times. They know there are cameras watching their every move, so breaking character is simply not an option. Apparently, he's never even witnessed an instance where someone slipped up and revealed their true identity. In fact, the level of Disney protocol is so stringent that my friend once tried to offer a water bottle to an exhausted employee on a hot day, only to be sternly warned that he could be fired if anyone saw him accepting a gift from a guest. They can't take anything, no exceptions. And the stories get even crazier. My friend recounted one incident where an acrobat actually fell off a float and face planted onto the ground, knocking themselves out. But the cast members simply formed a circle around the injured performer and danced in sync as they dragged the body away. The guests never knew a thing. Story 25. I'll never forget my experience auditioning to be a face character at Disneyland. It was a tough process, but I made it all the way to the final stage, where they put us through all kinds of crazy scenarios to see how we'd respond while staying in character. One of the things they had us practice was dealing with rude or inappropriate comments from guests. That part really stuck with me because my dance teacher, who used to be a face character at the park, had shared some horror stories from her time in costume. Apparently, she was often cast as Pocahontas, and guests would sometimes try to reach up her skirt or make other inappropriate advances. I can't even imagine how uncomfortable and upsetting that must have been, having to maintain your composure and keep the magic alive for everyone else. In the end, I'm glad I didn't make it through the full audition process. The pay was barely above minimum wage at the time, which was only around $6.75 an hour, and dealing with rude or even dangerous guests on a daily basis. No thank you. I have so much respect for the cast members who take on those roles and manage to stay in character no matter what. Thanks for listening to these regrettable recaps. Please like and subscribe if you'd like more of this content in the future. And watch the video that's on your screen now for more regrettable recaps.